Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week as we always do on Saturdays with an album review where we look at an entire album track by track, exploring what each song does in isolation and it's part of the larger album. Today we're going to be looking at Odraza, who we've actually checked out once before, maybe a couple times on live stream as well, but one proper reaction back in 2020. It's been a while since we visited them. I vaguely have the idea of black metal associated with them, but maybe that's a little off. It has been a while. Otherwise, I have no idea what I'm in store for here. They are Polish, though, I believe, and I'm not going to try to pronounce any of these song titles, of which there are only 7. We have 7 tracks here, total of 46 minutes. Bit on the shorter side, well, at least as far as the fact that we've had hour-and-a-half albums on album review in the past. But 46 minutes isn't exactly short. Most of the tracks are a bit on the shorter side, though. 3, 5, 6, 7. We do have 2 double-digit tracks, though, in the middle and the end. Nice bit of pacing there, I hope, anyways. Without further ado, let's dive into this first track, and see what Odraza is bringing to the table today. Alright, so we had something that sounded like trains, and then explosions, and the toms kind of took the energy of the explosions and... Okay. Not a huge fan of the bass kick production, but I'm sure I'll come around to it. I thought we were building intensity, but interesting vocal style. Yeah, fun use of silence there. Even though I don't think fun is what I would call the song as a whole. Interesting thing the bass did there too. There's the blast beat. On a snare without the beats too, the snare's turned off. Oh, that's cymbal work though. Oh, jeez. Very interesting phrasing on the drums there. Kick of energy here. Snare on 2 and 4. I don't think we've had that kind of energy. Oh man. All right. That's an interesting opening track here, especially since I thought I was getting something else. There are blackened elements to it, but I don't know if I would call it black metal. Post black metal, maybe? Came out in 2014. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, there's blackened elements. I think the guitars have quite a bit of compression to them, but the riffs themselves don't feel very blackened. Death metal, maybe, is where I think the riffage is most similar to. The drumming here is groovy in a lot of places. Groove metal, is that a genre or am I making that up? I'd say once again though, maybe death metal would be a place that I would expect to hear some of these grooves. The vocals, honestly, to me are kind of like the hardcore scream. They feel very punky to me more than anything else. Something that I think you'd hear in metalcore. Traditional metalcore, not the modern stuff. So again, not very blackened. We do get some blast beats in here, and we do get some faster guitar playing, and sometimes they line up, but usually they don't. So yeah, it's I'm just gonna preface this. This is not my cup of tea, but I'm certainly enjoying this a lot more than I expected coming into the album, because I thought I was just in store for 45 minutes of traditional black metal, maybe some variation, maybe some experimentation, but something that kind of sticks closer to the old school style. And instead we have something that kind of feels blackened in texture more so than in composition. In fact, would we call this, is blackened death metal a thing? I think blackened doom is a thing, but for some reason I'm kind of blanking on if blackened death is a thing. But I think that's kind of where I sit with this. The production is definitely sort of blackened, but compositionally, no. And that kind of makes this fun. The guitars, I think, are the key here. Very rule of cool, very engaging, very aggressive guitar work. Some use of pedal tones, but not always. There's usually some sort of repeated idea in the first 75% of a riff, and then at the end, there's usually a bit of movement. Usually some sort of static idea, followed up with a moving punctuation. That seems to be the style that they went with for this specific track. I don't know if that's going to be their blueprint for riff writing on the entire album. Usually you can gauge that. I'd say that I am expecting more of that riff writing on the album, but bands have surprised me in the past. Maybe this is a bit of a softer opening, and the next 40 minutes of music is pure straightforward black metal. You never know with bands. But we do hear a lot of that type of riff writing on this, and usually both guitars are doing the same thing. Sometimes they deviate a little bit for harmony, but generally speaking, they're kind of creating this singular sound, just split across the two channels, left and right. But they drive so much of the song, and there's so many riffs in here too. For only being just under 6 minutes long, I feel like there were quite a few riffs in there. They all sort of bled together a little bit for me, given their similarity of blueprint, but I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot of ideas, and some a little bit more atmospheric than others. Like I said, most of it was just kind of this driving vibe, but there were a couple that just, I don't know if they used extra reverb on them. They just kind of hit the chord, though, and allow that texture, the white noise of the compression, a little bit of waviness or movement to it, to just kind of inform the atmosphere of the section. I felt like those were nice contrasts to the more driving melodic riffage that we saw in a majority of the tracks. So that was kind of cool too. But I mean, if you take the guitars out, I mean, this is kind of true for a lot of metal, but if you take the guitars out, I really don't think that there's a lot going on here. Particularly when we look at the bass, I'll be completely honest, I couldn't hear the bass half of the time. I really had to attenuate my ears to it, and even then, it still kind of came and went. It is massively overshadowed in the mix by the guitars, and I'd even say the drums. But there are a couple of moments when it kind of it doesn't even peek through. When I hear it, it is a massive sound. It's kind of wild how I don't hear it more often because it is kind of a big tone overall. I think it just gets lost in the mix of everything. There is well, we'll get to the production in a second, but the production is not doing any favors for the bass clarity at all. The drums, there's some nice groovy bits in here, but a lot of it is very rigid and straightforward, though that doesn't mean that there isn't any playfulness either. We had a fairly straightforward bass kick and snare idea at one point in the song, but playing around on the bell of the ride cymbal, and we had eighth notes, we had triplets, we had 16th notes in there, just like every pocket of 2 to 4 beats would shift things up a little bit, and I thought that was pretty cool. I pointed that out during the reaction when I said something along the lines of, cool idea on the cymbals there. That's what it was. And I like stuff like that. Especially since in particular, crash and ride cymbal, the hi-hat to a lesser extent, especially if it's closed, but these instruments are far and away in their own pocket of timbre, but also pitch. The guitars on a lot of this track are not necessarily, riding their lowest string open, but they're not exactly high-pitched stuff either. I don't think we're anywhere near the highest string on the guitar, and certainly not an octave up on that either, around the 12th fret and stuff, where a lot of solos might happen in say thrash metal or something. We're kind of in a middle range that likes to lean towards the lower end. The bass is really low. The harsh vocals have a perception of being mid to low again, and the snare and bass kick and the toms are also mid to low tones. There's just a lot of stuff encompassing the same range on this track. So the cymbals have basically free reign. You could barely tap it and it's going to come through the mix rather well because it's not competing with anything here. And so I like not only just when the cymbals show up as a way to create this lighter, brighter sound within something that feels a bit darker and muddier most of the time, but also because we tend to see some interesting rhythmic ideas there that aren't really replicated anywhere else. And I think that this creates a very specific balance of sound throughout this song where a lot of it feels dark and rigid and aggressive, and then you have these lighter, more dexterous, brighter ideas that can pop through every once in a while. I think that's also why we don't see too many of these. The cymbals get used enough throughout the song. It doesn't feel like it's tom heavy or anything like that. But we don't always see the fun, dexterous, rhythmic playfulness going on in them. And I think that's because it does change the way the song feels. Everything else encompasses a specific vibe whenever the cymbals do something like this, or I suppose whenever the drummer does something like this on the cymbals. It feels drastically different from everything else. It's these little pockets of sunlight coming through a cloudy day. It can change the way things feel 100%, and I'm usually all for that because I'm not super fond of, the dark, dreary, heavy, muddy sound that they've got going on here. I think it's a fantastic atmosphere. They're absolutely nailing it. I'm just not the audience for it, and so I like little moments like that, but I can totally appreciate that they need to be used sparingly, and I think that's why we don't hear them too often on this track, and why I anticipate that they might show up on the album more, but in smaller measures. This takes us to the vocals. Like I said, this whole segment right here is about instruments that I feel are doing a good job at what they're doing, but kind of don't drive the song the same way the guitars do. The vocals have one gear. They're locked into it the entire time, but it's an interesting gear, I think, for the sound. It sounds like a hardcore shout, but something about it also doesn't. I don't know how to describe it really, because honestly I don't know what's going on. Usually I can hear a sound and at least make a hypothesis of how it was created, both on the engineering side and on the performance side. But here I'm a little lost. It has a bit of compression to it. It sounds possibly like there's fry scream going on, but it also feels like there's some shouting going on, some real vocal cord work with compression on top of that and a heavy amount of air pressure underneath it. That to me is the shouting part. Not to say that growls or fry screams sound thin, but when you compare them to somebody, going, hey, and kind of like getting all of that power underneath as they're trying to shout these words out, probably to get someone's attention, especially if they're doing it loud in an unsafe way, as some people tend to do. When you're just going to shout somebody's name one time, you're not too concerned about how safe it is to use forever. You're not a vocalist who's going to be using this vocal technique every night on a tour for months on end where you can blow out your vocals or anything like that. But it tends to have a lot of support underneath it. It tends to sound large and meaty, and harsh vocals don't usually do that unless they're layered up. And this is because the compression that you're creating doesn't really need a lot of air support. It does need to be supported, sure, but you don't need to push as much air through as you would for something like this. And it just sounds totally different to me as far as like timbre. And so this vocal style though sounds large, and it doesn't sound layered. You can usually hear this in harsh vocals where maybe there's 2 or 3 different takes all put together, and the clashing of all of the compression, the natural compression, and probably the compression put on from a compressor. You can hear how all of that elevates the white noise element of it, but you can also hear how they sort of are separated within the mix. It's tough to really create perfectly aligned harsh vocals so that you can layer them up in a way that seems invisible. This sounds like a single track take for me, but it still has power of shouts to it. but it still has like the crackle of a fry harsh too. So I don't know what's going on with it. It sounds wild to me. There's definitely a metal element, but it also feels punk in some ways. And it's a really wild combination, I think, to put on a song that is, as far as I can tell, blackened death metal. And my closest analogy for the vocals are something similar to metalcore. So it's a really wild combination that I'm kind of enjoying, but would never have expected. It's just a combination that I find to be rather rare. Which is actually interesting too, because I don't remember exactly what the thumbnail said, but I did mention when we checked this band out back in 2020, my little snippet for it was about the interesting vocals or the impressive vocals or something like the thumbnail. My main thought snippet was about the vocals, and I find it interesting that even here I don't know what the difference is between release. Like, I don't know if we checked out a song previously that came before or after this album, but for that to still be something that captures my attention, I guess that just says I don't change as much as I thought I did over the years. Of all the ways that my tastes and my ability to talk about music have changed, there are still some things that are just going to click with me, I guess. But yeah, I'm kind of here for it, and they're rather audible too. I don't speak Polish, so it's not like I could tell you exactly what he's saying, but it doesn't feel super muddied, super pushed into the mix either. I think if I understood Polish, I'd be able to tell you what's being said here. I think there's a lot of enunciation going on. I think there's clarity in the production. It's very well done, I think, as far as my taste and biases in harsh vocals go. And we've kind of been skirting around this issue here, or not issue, but topic. The production. Everything I've talked about has kind of leaned into it, and I was like, we'll put that off for a little bit. Let's finally get to it. The production on this it's a thing. There is clarity to everything. Other than the bass, which is really tucked into the mix, I can hear everything the drummer's doing. I can hear the guitar riffs. I was just talking about the clarity of the vocalist. Yeah, there's definitely readability to the song, but it is a messy, dirty mix too. Well, I should say a messy, dirty production. The mix is rather clear. The instruments are placed well, aside from most of them sitting within the same range of pitches, there's still a clarity to all of it. I think a lot of that has to do with placement and positioning of the sounds. But it is still a gritty, dirty production overall. There is a lot of compression going on here. It is, as I said earlier, a little muddy too. There's definitely some areas that I think could be more clearer. The bass could have a little bit more presence in the mix. And generally speaking, I think the song feels dim, dull, possibly. I think a lot of this comes down to the guitar tones that are being used, but I would wager that the EQing of the entire track comes into play a little bit here too. I don't mean to say that it sounds flat. It just doesn't sound like there's a lot of light to it. Like, if you were to compare this to, I don't know, a super poppy track from the Beatles or something that feels very bright and electric, this almost feels like the antithesis to that. It feels dark and gloomy and dim, and it doesn't have anything to do with the chord progressions. It doesn't have anything to do with the musical atmosphere of it. It's the production of it. I don't know any other way to really describe that. I kind of hope that maybe you feel something similar, and just hearing these words, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because unlike other things that I can usually, dig into some more nitty gritty elements of it, this, I think I just kind of have to leave it at that. I don't know any other way of describing it. But there is one element that I feel, well, it helps this a little bit, but I kind of wish there was some more pop to it. And it's the drum kit. The toms feel muddy. They don't feel very tight at all. It feels like there's a lot of decay going on with each individual hit. The snare sounds okay, but it also feels a bit mid-fi production rather than hi-fi production. There isn't a strong crack to it. It also has the snare beads turned off, so we don't have the snare rattle that accompanies the striking of the drum head. Um, and it just kind of feels, well, in this case, I think dull is a good word for it. It just kind of feels rounded off. It's missing the crack, it's missing the spark, it's missing the bite that I think snares usually have for something a bit rounder and darker in tone. It feels like it's lacking color. And this kind of goes for the bass kick too, although that is not only rounded off and made darker, but also pushed way down in the mix. The bass kick is really quiet, I think, personally. I think the drum kit production matches the vibe they're going for. A lot of these words I've used mimic the words I've used for the production as a whole. And like I mentioned during the reaction, I think this is something I'm going to acclimate to over the course of the listening experience of the album. But like I said, it was immediately noticeable to me. It is not my favorite kind of production. I don't want to call it lo-fi, but I think mid-fi is probably accurate here. It's kind of missing a lot of that crispness that I enjoy with popular and mainstream music, but it isn't quite muddied and illegible like some lo-fi music can be, especially lo-fi black metal. It sits somewhere in the middle, legible but still dark and compressed. And that's sort of my take on this opening song, too, as far as what it's trying to tell me. It's heavy, it's aggressive, very rule of cool. It's got some blistering moments to it as far as speed or at least time feel goes. But it's also muddy and dreary and dark and gloomy. Not musically again, but production wise. And that's a really interesting combination to me. Aggressive music with a dim production. It doesn't quite have the bite that thrash metal would have, or that traditional death metal has, with some sharper production to it. This feels a bit rounded off. It feels dulled. Dulled? What is the past tense of dull? Why can't I think about that? Uh, and I find that to be interesting because it kind of takes the bite off of that aggression. Even when we get the blast beats, I feel like a lot of the times we hear blast beats in black metal, especially with a more prominent snare sound in the mix, it can kind of get to a point where it fatigues me sonically. I'm just kind of tired of hearing that sound. And maybe it's also because we didn't get a lot of blast beats in here, but when the blast beats came up, it was very easy to sort of ignore them or for my mind to sort of push it into the background and focus on more of the other elements going on in the music. And I think a lot of that is due to the production on them. So on one hand, not a big fan of that production. On the other hand, that makes the blast beats a little more palatable for me. So I don't know. Maybe I should be praising the production on this. I'm gonna hit some lyrics on this, and then we're gonna push forward into the shortest track on the album. All right. 3 of today's tracks I have hand translated lyrics for. The other 4 we'll figure out as we get there. I guess we'll be using some AI translations on them. This one, though, seems to be about someone who is upset with the direction that their country, city, I don't know, the area that they live in, we'll put it that way, the direction that it's going in. Part of this, I think, is laid at the feet of, I don't know, the government, the political forces, but there's also some criticism levied towards the people who allow all of this to happen. And the song, even the title, translates to Let It Happen. The first stanza says, "For those who, trusting with hopelessness, broke their forces, this town was their Gehenna and Mecca. And for those who in numbness sold their lives to the treadmill without will." So I don't know what the treadmill is. I mean, the metaphor of a treadmill for everyday life can be used in so many different directions, whether it's more of like a corporate treadmill or even just the idea of living. You know, just always moving forward blindly or mindlessly would probably be a better way to describe it. Just, you go to work, you come home, you do some chores, you go to bed, you wake up, you go to work, and you just do this over and over and over. So this idea of a treadmill within society can be used to a couple of ways, but generally it's just saying that people sold their lives to the treadmill without any fight, any force, any pushback to it. They just did it. So he says, to all of you who have ruined the city, who have just go about their lives doing nothing, with no force, no fight, nothing. You just go along with the flow no matter what it says. He says, to the bottoms, for the dogs, the convicts, and anyone else who fertilizes death so that they still need life. That's wild. That is just a wild line to me. Well, okay, so I actually have a couple translations here just in case, because one of them seems to be a bit more literal. It's not necessarily to the bottom, it's more of bottoms up. We're putting a cheer out for these people. And I think that's what makes it hit even more. It says you're so focused on death, and that's the only reason that you need more life. Not because you actually value humanity or life itself, but because death is the only thing you can focus on, and without life, you can't have that death. It says 3 cheers for you. Bottoms up for the children in the graves, so that knowing the cold earth, they won't crave for heaven. I mean, just more biting criticism. I guess we're talking about warmongers here. That would be my interpretation without knowing anything else. I feel like there might be some cultural or historical elements here that would help me understand who or what specific events this is criticism for, but just the general concept of warmongers here, burying not just one child, but children in general as a plural, and also talking about those who are so focused on death. That's what that feels like to me. It says, bottoms up for the unknown tomorrow, for the spilled days, and for the black lungs. Yeah, just kind of saying that life could have been better. But this is what we have, and obviously it must be something we're celebrating. So, bottoms up. Let's drink our drinks and have a good time. He says, in this frost, in this night, in this bottom, let it happen. I didn't quite understand what this meant, but we see this repeated at the very end of the song, and there's an extra line. It says, it's the voice of our ridiculous generation. It's the people who allow this to happen, to let it happen. There could be pushback. There could be civil unrest. I don't know if this area assuming we're talking about Poland, but I don't know what era of Poland either. So I don't know what kind of government they might have had, but assuming the people had a voice, they could have elected different people for this, but they didn't. There is no pushback for these atrocities. This is the voice of our ridiculous generation. This is what the people wanted at this time. Yeah, I mean, this song kind of hits a little close to home. Yeah, that's the general gist of the track, though, is that things are not great. There were people who used to fight to make things better, but that's not us. Our generation just become complacent. So, obviously, this is what we want. 3 cheers for all this terrible stuff going around. Yeah, a little sarcastic, little tongue-in-cheek, but very biting commentary here. And so the bleakness of this, the feeling of not being able to change anything because those around you don't want anything to be changed, and matching that with an anger, I think perfectly fits this sort of dull production with aggressive riffage. There's a lot of anger in here, and it's in an environment of bleakness. Yeah, I think they did a fantastic job painting that sonically. And so we're going to dive into the next track then. It's a wild way to kick an album off. It's getting straight to the point. I have a feeling this is going to be a bit of a heavy album. This next song, like I mentioned, is the shortest. I'd kind of want to run it into the next, but the next song is over 10 minutes long. So we're just going to do this one by itself, probably have a short analysis for it, and then we'll continue on. Fun little back and forth there. Oh, okay, that's... yeah. Oh, you know it's a good description of the production, though? See, that's a big bass sound. Like, can you hear it anymore? Blunt. Blunt is a good description of the production. See, that kind of build up there reminds me more of punk than metal too. But you hear how small the drums kind of feel compared to the guitars. The guitars take up so much space, so much prominence in the composition too. There's a little bit of pitch control. Oh, I like this triplet feel. There's a little bit of pitch control in the vocal delivery too. Oh, it's not just a triplet, it's a 3 against 4. We do the intro again, the panning, joined together, kicking off the third verse probably, similar to the first. Alright, yeah, this is definitely going to be a short analysis segment. We've kind of lost a lot of the death metal riffage on this and have transitioned to more of a harmonic one. Kind of pick 4, I think they're notes, but the 2 guitars are giving us slightly different notes. We're getting some dyads here, but da 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 da, just 4 basically notes that provide this chordal movement. We kind of shift that up a little bit where we had da 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 da, then we go da 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 da, and kind of shift it up a third to kind of provide a little bit of contrast there, but that's honestly all the guitars do. The bass, we got to hear a little bit of movement in that pocket, but like I said, man, that is a big bass tone. It has a lot of weight and chunkiness to it, but it gets lost so quick in the mix. The guitars are just so dominant. Even listening to the drums there, if the drums weren't center channel and the guitars pushed to the side, I really think you'd have just as hard of a time hearing the drums as you do the bass. It's definitely a production choice. Not one I would go for. I like a little bit more clarity. But I suppose it works for what they're trying to do. I think it does capture specific sounds. And then the vocals here, kind of like the first one, kind of shouty, kind of raspy, kind of harsh and compressed. That's the entirety of the song. There is one shift, though. We do get this cool 4/3 polyrhythm in the bridge. I like that part. I thought that was a pretty cool idea. Because at first, I caught the triplet feel. I'm like, all right, cool. We're working in groups of 3 now. But then I listened to the really interesting bass kick rhythm. Lots of syncopation on this. Kind of obtuse on its own, but it works really well against the triplet feel to create a quasi-hemiola, which is a 3/2 polyrhythm. And so here, 4... instead of 3/2 or 3/4, which is similar but different. And they did a really cool thing with the bass kick in order to sort of imply the 3/2, the 3/2 hemiola without actually playing the hemiola, because that would kind of not work since we're not doing a 3/2. We're kind of doubling that up to a 3/4. So that whole section from the drum perspective was very cool. I like that. It's not something you see too often in traditional death metal or black metal. That's usually something reserved for more proggy styles or technical styles of metal. So that was a very fun idea right there. And actually, I say it's reserved for proggy. I do think that there are some progressive elements on this album so far. I know we're only, 9 minutes in, but it is a smashing up of a bunch of genres that I don't normally hear. Maybe this is more popular of a sound, and maybe this is just my first exposure to it. But in all of the death metal and blackened metal that y'all have had me listen to, this does not seem to be a common sound to explore. Well, this song specifically was more straightforward black metal, but the first track, yeah, I don't think I've heard a lot like that. So, yeah, I'd say that this is a little more progressive. Would I put it in the realm of progressive black metal? I don't know yet. We'll see as we go and continue on through the album. But at this point, I do feel like it has some progressive tendencies. So pulling some wild polyrhythm like this out kind of makes sense so far with my understanding of what they're doing with their art. But that's honestly it for this track. At the end of the day, it's really straightforward. There's 2 whole riffs that go on with it. Only a couple of drum patterns. The vocals are rather straightforward, and the bridge is the only big shift that goes on in here, and that whole thing is mostly a rhythmic change. The atmosphere, the riffage, the vocal delivery, none of that really alters much. The atmosphere of the song's rather consistent throughout the whole thing, and even pairs well against track 1. I don't have anything new to add to any sort of atmospheric or emotional resonance for this song. It's still aggressive and blunt. As I mentioned earlier, I think that is a good word rather than dull. I don't know if dull still feels right to me, but I don't know if it conveys the right idea to you all. I think blunt captures the concept a little bit more accurately to how I feel the production on this. So, I will say though that the intro and the build up into the bridge both felt very punky. And I don't know if that's something we're going to continue to explore more of. I already mentioned the vocals kind of feel a little hardcore adjacent to me. Hearing some punk composition in here was also interesting. At this point, I'm just kind of intrigued on where they're going to take everything, because honestly, they can go in so many different directions. I think they're going to stay in their lane for the most part, but hearing just how similar, of course, but slightly different the two tracks are that we've listened to, it kind of makes me wonder where else we're going to take this blackened death sound. What kind of other ideas we're going to pair that with. Let me find some lyrics for this one, and then we'll move on to track 3. Alright, the title of this track translates to the Great Misogynist, and repeatedly throughout the song, our narrator is speaking to another person, and there is no you in all of this, no second person. The only word used to describe them repeatedly through the track is the word horror. So I thought, okay, maybe by the end of the song, given that the title of it is The Great Misogynist, maybe there's going to be some call out of this behavior. There isn't. It just plays everything at face value through this perspective of the narrator. It says, don't be afraid. The night is still young. Don't be afraid of vodka. It never deceives. A thimble into a thimble, cups like bells. I don't really get this part. I'll be honest, I don't really get a lot of this. The chorus comes in, says, don't be afraid. Morning is coming. Smash vodka with every fallen one at the cross. Race with the night with frost and hope. Distribute into small pieces those who sow in tears, with ornaments of pure monotony. Boredom lashes you, that which is equally pure. Smash with a thread of guilt, not minding the crosses, and shout with all your might, street. I don't really get this one, much at all. I don't know if it's a translation thing. Unlike the last track that we checked out, this one is done through Google Translate. I ran it through DeepL as well, and doesn't really provide anything else. Something I believe is being lost in translation here, and I kind of wish I had a hand translated version for this, but I don't. And I don't know, Google's wasn't too far off for the first one either. I did use it as a source for something a little less literal of a translation, and it did help in places. So I don't know, maybe this one's just going over my head. Maybe it's another cultural thing that I'm missing here. Maybe the constant reference to alcohol, particularly vodka, and crosses, bringing in this religious element. Maybe that means something to the lyricist. For some reason, it doesn't mean much to me, though. And so that's going to wrap up the lyrical dive on that one. Alright, let's push into track 3 then. Hopefully this one I'll be able to understand the lyrics a little bit better. If nothing else, it is 10.5 minutes long. I'm sure we'll have a bit of a longer musical discussion for it. Let's dive in. So the you can really hear the bass there. The tempo isn't that much slower if you take it at this faster bit, but if you assume the guitar is playing eighth notes, it's a very slow song, and this kind of matches the drums a little more. And this lines up with the slower one. The triplet bass kicks. pushing into the, oh, the 16th notes? Really smooth pulling into this halftime. Ooh, a little bluesy there. Okay. Drums go again with some interesting polyrhythmic ideas. The bass line and the wild harmony on the, yeah, those guitar punctuating ideas are wild. Little fill on the snare. Dude, I like this drummer. This is going to be the whole song. It's bouncing back and forth between more intense metallic sections and lighter ballady sounds. Although this is a build-up right here. We got the feedback coming in, rising volume on the drums. Oh, jeez. That rhythmic laughing is still going on in the background. What's making that sound though? I honestly thought it was a human voice to start with, but This is a fun section. Interestingly, I don't think it's supposed to be fun. The guitars are definitely creating something a bit drearier, but the drum work is just infectious. Bringing in some harmonic tension, there's some dissonance into the guitar work. I'm gonna assume those were gravity blasts, not based on speed, but based on attack. Those really tight snare rolls. And I thought it was over. That's a wild polyrhythm right there. We're 11 against 4. The cymbals only hit 10 times, but there's another beat before they come back in, so... Alright. Yeah, that was interesting. That took some of their more progressive tendencies that we saw on track 1 and really ran with it. Did some wild stuff, went some crazy directions. I mean, even just looking at the structure of the song, we kick it off with a very ballad style intro. This style comes back a few times throughout the song with various different riffs to go along with it. Even having the bass lead at times rather than the guitar. From here, though, we go into some black metal stuff. We bring the intensity down. We hit this bluesy section out of nowhere. Then we go to like the obtuse guitar lick section, and we're going to have to touch on that in isolation in a little bit because that was wild. We switch back to a more ballad style with the guitars just kind of creating a moody atmosphere, and the drummer just kind of goes off in sort of a solo, melodic drumming style. And then from here, it's just constant rising energy. We get some more straightforward death ideas. We get some more straightforward black metal ideas. It takes us to that wild, fast, aggressive gravity blast section. It's just everything, just getting more and more intense while sticking to this heavy metallic overall sound. And then wrapping the song up with that fade out with the 11 against 4 polyrhythm. Like, I guess it was 11 against 8, wasn't it? That was 2 bars. Yeah, 11 hits over 2 bars. I just, the song is a roller coaster, and you never really know it's going to come up because there's no foreshadowing. We don't ease into anything. At best, we have the rising intensity coming out of low energy sections to high energy sections, but high energy sections will have a guitar punctuating line and a drum fill going off at the same time, and sometimes that repeats the phrase, sometimes that builds us into the next section, sometimes that builds us into a drop and we return to a ballad section. There's no way to really know. You can't anticipate it without having just heard it and memorized the direction that these buildups are going to go in. And so you just kind of have to be along for the ride on this roller coaster. Just let go of the wheel and say, all right, Odraza, where are you taking us today? Every couple of moments, where are you going to steer the ship? Where are we heading? And you just got to be ready for anything with it. And I dig that for the most part. I'm more of a fan of progressive styles, and if you're gonna give me something Blackened like this or Blackened adjacent, it's got to be fun. You got to spruce it up. If you want me to enjoy myself a little bit, giving me something progressive like this. Yeah, in fact, this is a really good a single song reaction track, I think. Granted, track 1 had some fun ideas too. I think that, well, actually, first tracks are usually kind of more like traditional reactions on an album. As we get through albums, I find that some of the more generic ideas I'm just repeating over and over between songs. So they're kind of less full of a reaction as we get into an album. But, I mean, you guys saw, that would be a pretty solid reaction too. But this, I think this is where a lot of cool ideas are on display. Really dig into it. A lot of meat to dig into. And so let's get into some of this. There's low energy moments all across this track. This is a bit of a deviation from the rest of the album. We have the ballad to start with. We have the moody section in the middle of the track. And then we have a bunch of returns to that ballady segment at the beginning, sometimes as their own situation, their own segment, other times as transitions. I dig it though. It's a really nice contrast to everything else. There's a lot of high energy metal stuff going on in this album. And for a moment, we get to dip down a little bit, have clean, niche electric guitar sounds, no or light drumming, and just kind of focusing on, again, beautiful writing. That's not to say that some of the more aggressive ideas in here aren't beautiful, and that's not to say that all of the lighter stuff in here is beautiful. Sometimes it does want to err on the side of, well, I mean, even some of the more somber moments are still like a sort of dark beauty too. So anyways, it is a beautiful, calming-ish beginning of a song, and I appreciated that. We had it for a good 60, 70 seconds too. Fairly lengthy, I would say. Especially coming off of a 3-minute song that was rather one note, just kind of did its thing for an elongated amount of time. From here, though, we move into some black metal. Yeah, okay. Okay, we're going to get a little bit more of that. But from here, we shift gears to like bluesy guitar playing. There's a little bit of bending in here, which is just black metal with bending. It's used sparingly. I don't think it works really well with this level of distortion. But yeah, we get a little bit of it. That was nice. We get some harmonic changes. The chord progression doesn't alter much, but the notes that the guitar uses and the melody does. It creates a little bit of a clash. This dissonance we'll actually hear quite a bit throughout this song. Haven't really heard too much of it throughout this album, but I mean, so far we've been doing pretty straightforward, death metal or black metal writing, the progressive elements have come as little ornamental ideas or structural ideas. So we haven't really had a chance to explore dissonance much, but this is definitely progressive in so many different ways. Specifically, though, compositionally, structure, harmonically. And we get to hear a little bit of that in the bluesy section where the guitar shifts to some blues scales while the music is still in its like pentatonic metal stuff, and it does create a little bit of clashing there. Also, I think this comes out of nowhere, and I don't know that it necessarily fits. I remember it getting a little chuckle out of me. It was an absurd shift. There's a lot of absurd shifts in here. I probably laughed, or I chuckled. It's not like anything had me rolling in laughter, but just sort of chuckling at the oddity of the movement from where we were to where we are. That happened way more often than I expected on this song, and this is one of those cases. Shifting to the blues scale with a little bit of bending going on the guitar feels way out of place here. The production does not help it much at all. And even compositionally, like I said, we have some tension rising harmonically because the rest of the band doesn't really want to make this change. It's only the guitarist. So we have some clashing elements there. It is a fun little moment. But much like I mentioned during the more somber guitar work with the wild drum work on top, I don't think fun's necessarily the word they want to go for it, but that is certainly how I would describe it. It is sort of like an absurd comedy show where, you know, the actors go from one room to the next and it doesn't really make sense. The last room was like a hospital room, and now they're in I don't know, a restaurant, and all they did was walk through a door, and they don't make any note of this. It's just totally normal for them. And we just kind of have to go along with the absurdity of that writing. And it's sort of comedic because of that, but it's played straight in the writing itself. And that's sort of how I feel about this. The band does not make any winks or nods throughout this song. I don't think anything in here is supposed to be comedic. It's just wildly absurd to me, and that makes me chuckle. And this is just one of those moments. Now, after this, though, things really get off the rails. The section after this, or I think it was 2 sections after this, actually, because I think we dipped it down and then built up out of that as a transition. Exceptionally obtuse guitar licks. Rhythmically, harmonically, it made very little sense to me. It bumped everything back up to a metal vibe. The drums were pretty aggressive again. We had the vocal shouting, screaming stuff going on. The guitar lick just didn't really feel like it fit. Kind of felt like we had some free jazz ideas going on here. Not my favorite kind of melody writing, to be honest. Both in the realm of free jazz and what they were doing here as a parallel to free jazz. Geez, it was just one of those moments where I can kind of see where they're going for more of an eclectic style of writing, something more experimental than progressive, maybe. I think it kind of works if you want to take it at face value. It's just not for me. I don't understand that section. It feels like the song begins to it feels like, anyways, I begin to lose the thread of what the song's trying to say, the narrative it's trying to go through, and I honestly began to get lost here a little bit. I could still understand what was going on harmonically. The drums were keeping me in the groove rhythmically. The vocals were still keeping me locked into a focus as far as like a lead instrument. But this guitar riff, my ears kept drifting back to it, thinking, dude, what are you doing? You're the only one. You're like the sore thumb sticking out here. Everyone else is locked in on this. And what are you doing? You did this earlier with the blues stuff. That didn't really fit what everyone else was doing either. And the guitarist just, this song likes to deviate into their own world. And I don't know what that's about. Sometimes it kind of works. Sometimes it doesn't. And this is one of the cases where I think it's a bit rough. But from here, we see the same values sort of crop up in the drummer, where everybody else is sort of on the same line rhythmically, and then the drummer just starts throwing out these wild polyrhythmic ideas. And this leads us into the next lower energy section, which is the moody guitar, really creating this dark, dreary, clean electric guitar atmosphere. I don't think the bass was present. We didn't have the second guitar. We didn't have the vocals here. This guitar is just playing these chords, or I guess it was chord shaping, playing single notes at a time, but kind of walking up and down the chord. It felt moody. It felt dreary. I was totally on board for this energy to kind of like pull me down and kind of drain me. And then the drums kick in. What are they doing? We get all these wild melodic polyrhythmic ideas that are just pushing really hard against the quarter note pulse coming out of the guitar. And I think I want to make this statement too. The obtuse guitar licks, the polyrhythmic drumming here, in isolation, they're very cool ideas as far as experimentation, as far as pushing your instrument to new levels and exploring stuff outside of more traditional sounds. Totally on board with it. And in many cases here, even looking at some of the drum patterns and the polyrhythms that have been present on the album so far, praise has come from me. It's about execution, it's about context. I think that the drum patterns here are impressive, and I love listening to them. I think they're very cool. It doesn't match the mood. It takes something that feels somber and heavy and lightens it up. And also the absurdity of taking something so heavy and moody and then putting this jazzy drumming on top of it is absurd. It cracks me up. And I mentioned that this section was fun, but when I listen to the atmosphere, I don't think it wants to be fun. It's not aiming to be fun. The drums inject funness into it. And that schism between the moodiness and the fun turns into absurdist comedy for me. It's a wild segment. I think the atmosphere is great. I think the polyrhythmic drumming is fascinating. I would love to see a drum cam of that. Very cool ideas there. The two going off at the same time doesn't really work for me. Unless this sort of oddity, this smashing together of disparate ideas is the key here. Maybe that's the point of that part. But without knowing the lyrics leading up to that, all I had to go on was the music, and I was not prepared for that at all. And I have no idea how that's supposed to work, if that's supposed to work. It feels very out of place for me. Now, I mentioned after this, though, it's just a ramping up of intensity. We bring the electric guitars back into their distorted, overdriven sound. They start playing faster and faster, moving into death-style rule of cool licks, and then moving into the 16th note strumming of black metal riffs. The drummer begins incorporating what I think are gravity blasts here. Not that they're any faster than blast beats. There's just more aggression, a bigger sound to it, and it could be production too, but it feels like the technique is different. It's allowing him to get more attack off of this speed, and just moving your hand up and down, that's going to require a lot of force, but using the middle of the drum and the edge of the snare itself as a fulcrum point in order to allow gravity to help you lift the snare back up. All you have to worry about is pushing it down. I think you can get more energy off of that. You can actually increase the volume and the size of the attack. I might be wrong on this. It might actually be the opposite. Anybody who's a drummer, let me know. But that's my interpretation of how this is going. Regardless, the snare attack sounds bigger, it sounds beefier than it has in the past when we've heard blast beats, and the bass kick is faster than ever. We have a lot of really fun cymbal work going on here too. It starts out rather light, turns into some rather dexterous dancing and bouncing around. It creates something that feels very light and effortless, despite the intensity of everybody playing at this speed. And of course, that wraps the song up as the drums push from this syncopation and polyrhythm on the cymbals to the 11 against 8 polyrhythm that we have on the crash cymbal against the snare and bass kick. And the guitars continue to exist on their 16th note playing. We fade out from there. This is the most intense part of the song we've heard so far. I don't think it feels very intense because the song is so compressed down. It feels so claustrophobic. I think if it had a wider soundstage to work within, maybe it could sound large as I think it wants to. But I mean, that's just one of the things with mid-fi production that you just can't escape. It doesn't really feel any bigger than any other moment of the album we've listened to, minus, the ballad parts. Those are going to feel smaller. But as far as big moments of the track, high intensity parts of the album so far, they've all really felt the same. And this feels like it should have been a peak, something that felt larger or bigger or wider than all the others. And it just doesn't have enough room in the sound sphere to showcase that width, though. So to me, that's a big negative. It's one of the reasons to go for more high fidelity production. But I think it's more of a caveat, a compromise made in order to achieve this sound, this very blunt, dark, dreary atmosphere. It's going to be hard to craft with high fidelity production. So, you gotta take the benefits where you can and accept the compromises where you can't make the changes. And I think that they're hitting the atmosphere they want, and that's just going to limit some of their more dynamic writing and how far they can take some songs. So it does feel compositionally like a big moment. It just sonically doesn't. But I think that's you just gotta deal with that because of the production style they're aiming for. Yeah, so far though, I think this is my favorite track on the album. Track 1 is a good song. But this hits on a lot of different ideas. And I don't necessarily think it's exceptionally cohesive either. I just had a fun time with it. And it introduced a lot of very cool ideas. And I think that's why it's my favorite so far. It makes me really interested to see what they're going to do with the finale, which is 11 and a half minutes long. That's track 7. If they're going to revisit some of this wild proggy stuff, because ahead of us, we have a 6.5 and a 7.5 minute song. I think those are going to be more like track 1, with progressive tendencies, but more traditional ideas. And then the 11-minute song is going to be more of a progressive track overall. Alright, let's hit some lyrics. Alright, this track appears to be from the perspective of somebody who is possibly homeless. They're definitely without a job, though. They have a family, and life is bleak. There is this phrase that pops up a few times on this song, the blackest of black breads. Now, I don't know if it's a metaphor for anything, however, taken literally for somebody who is jobless, possibly homeless, probably low on funds and still need to feed a family, we're probably talking about moldy bread here, the moldiest of bread, but at least it's food. Now, I do think that this is also possibly a metaphor for despair or the bleakness of living, maybe something along those lines. But this, I think, is generally what the song is about. Now, the title translates to woven with Esperal. I don't know what Esperal is. I looked it up. That did not help much at all. The only thing that shows up in a US web search is an anti-alcoholism drug that basically works poorly with alcohol. So you take the pill, and then if you have alcohol, you get nauseous and all sorts of other side effects with it. And I guess the hope is to pair this negative feeling with the alcohol so that it helps you stop drinking alcohol. But other than that, I can't find any sort of definition for Esperal. So I don't know I don't know what that is. And that doesn't help my interpretation of any of this either. Having some sort of hook, some sort of main idea to sort of peer through the rest of the lyrics with helps a lot, especially with stuff like this where maybe things are getting lost in translation anyways. The first verse says, a basement spiral of impressions, she who fears mornings, in a tavern, a drunken snout, a tavern, a bruised snout. I think this is interesting because drunken and bruised kind of have synonyms. No, not they're used together. You think of a bar fight, you get drunk, you're going to get bruised. They don't necessarily belong together all the time, but there are certainly situations where drunken and bruised can be understood together. But in Polish, it's a soft rhyme, I think. I don't know what every letter sounds like in Polish, but the only difference between drunken and bruised in this case is a switching of a letter P to a letter B. Otherwise, the word is spelled the same. So I think that's one of those cases where a literal translation doesn't quite capture the feeling of the poetry of the language. It says he searches for defeat. He finds ashes of defeat, an ashtray of dreams. And there he finds the blackest of black breads. That his dreams are just ashes now. It's the end of something burnt. It's not even the fire that could be seen as a metaphor for passion. It's what's left over after that. The destructive part of the flame. He says, I found my will, pale and helpless, without work, with a woman and a child. So he doesn't really have the willpower to do anything. Life is just really terrible, really bleak right now. He has a family, but he doesn't have work. Says that the skies have faded and the housing estates are emptying. Some say the night is coming this autumn. Now, this is definitely metaphorical. This concept of the night shows up quite a bit. It pairs well with the blackness of the black bread. And, you know, the concept of dark times is a metaphor for tough times or bleak times or anything like that. This constant use of black, dark, and night, I think, paints a very bleak picture for this character. There is one more stanza in this, but I don't necessarily understand it. It says, there I found her, the blackest of black bread, there without a will, I prefer the pale one. A lover of empty tears, without a will, I prefer the pale one. They will call her boredom, the morning one, and the evening one in case of morning, and the autumn one in case of winter. None of that really makes much sense to me. Part of it feels kind of word salady. I don't know if it's supposed to be as looping in on itself that it does, or if that is a translation error. But it goes over my head, regardless. The final line, though, says, I dream of the Queen of Spades, and I dream of ashes. I don't know what the Queen of Spades represents. To me, that's just a card in a typical 52 card deck. I don't know if it has any meaning, but it doesn't mean anything to me in particular as far as figurative perception. So, I'm kind of lost on some of the details here, but I get the general gist of this. And I've been trying to pair it back to the music, as chaotic and whiplashy as it can be. This feels rather contained. Aside from the last couple of stanzas, which I don't get, everything else bleeds together into a singular focus, a dreariness and heaviness of life, a need to provide but an inability to do that. Lyrically, there's a strong focus on what the themes are, Musically, though, this is all over the place, and I'm going to come to my usual conclusion that maybe the musical side and the lyrical side were written separately, weren't necessarily designed to be understood as a whole. Although I find that interesting given how strong the thematic cohesion is on track 1. Track 2 might have some strong cohesion, but it went over my head a little bit, so I can't really speak on that one. We're going to push forward, though. We have a 1-minute song ahead of us. We're going to run that into track 5, which is 6.5 minutes. We'll see how this mid-segment goes. Okay, so we have the harmony between the two, but they don't always play together. Very simple drum part behind this. Small shift up the scale. This certainly feels like an intro, though, to whatever the next track is going to do. Okay. So we're still in 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. But it's grouped into a section of 4 and a section of 2. Rather than 3 and 3 like earlier parts. So this has an eerier edge to it. Maybe just a little bit of extra darkness that I haven't heard on other tracks. Ooh, what was that hi-hat rhythm? That's kind of funky. I've noticed that. Oh, of course, that's the punctuating idea. Where they'll play a riff in this range and then have one note that just kind of is this punctuating higher pitch idea and then back down to that lower range. Chord progression on this is an interesting shift. There's almost an enlightening element to it. I think it just borders on going into like full awe, but it does feel like it wants to imply a feeling of enlightenment. Nice to hear the bass in this section. Is that a harmonica? Those toms got a boost. Why that? Nowhere else on the album. See, that was a lot quieter. I'm gonna say that was an engineering mistake. Almost a 1 minute fade out. Exponential. I feel like it's fading out quicker here at the end, but it's been on a quieter slope for a while. Okay. So I was kind of right in my assumption. This is a more straightforward song than track 3 was. I was expecting something a little closer to track 1 that kind of focused on more death metal ideas with a Blackened production, but this focused on more black metal ideas with a Blackened production. It does incorporate some more death metal sections to it, but a majority of the parts I feel lined up better with track 2 as far as their approach to writing riffs. But let's start with track 4 here. We have an introduction to track 5. I thought it was fine. It was interesting to see the drummer chill out for a second. We don't see that too often. The drummer's consistently either been going ridiculously crazy with blast beats and 16th note bass kicks, or has been getting really funky with progressive time feels and polyrhythms and stuff like that. Here, though, they're just real chill, real laid back. We have the two guitars harmonizing with each other, creating these dyads, 2-note chords, but not always playing together. It feels like the left one is rather consistent, just always playing the same, 4-chord progression, but the right one kind of dips out every once in a while. I can't say I understand what this song is doing, but I do think it is interesting. It has me asking questions. It makes me wonder why. If I had an interview with these guys, I'd be like, what was track 4 supposed to represent musically? Because it's a cool atmosphere, and it begins to introduce some of the more eerie elements that we would hear in track 5 that we haven't really heard elsewhere. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of really aggressive sounds throughout. I think this is where we've begun to go for more of an anxiety, an anxious feeling more so than an aggressive one. And we introduce that in the 4-minute interlude of track 4 to focus on it in track 5's full song. But I kind of hope there's a thematic purpose to why the right guitar decides to cut out every now and then. Regardless, I think it is a great introduction, and I honestly don't see why it is its own track. It's one of those interesting choices that I don't think I get. You would never listen to it on its own. I can't see anybody thinking, yeah, I'm really down for a 1-minute interlude right now. That's all I have time for. Let me throw on track 4 of Odraza's album. But honestly, it also feels a bit integral to track 5. I can't imagine checking out track 5 without it. It sets up the feelings for it. Now, I think track 5 could work standalone, but it is improved by starting with track 4. It's one of those things that every artist is going to be different about how they want to divide up their album and pace it and where to put tracks and all this stuff. But me personally, this would have just been a 7-minute, 45-second track. I don't know why you would need to separate those out. Regardless, like I said, does a fantastic job of bringing us into track 5. Track 5 expands on the ideas of track 4 and continues to give us this eerie feeling with the chord progressions of the guitars. It does so in a very Blackened approach, though. We have the blast beats, we have the bass kicks, we have the 16th note picking on the guitars. We get this for a while, a minute and a half or so. We back it down a little bit when the vocals come in, but we continue to focus on this atmosphere that we've already been crafting for the last 3 minutes, give or take. I find this interesting. Aside from track 2, we really don't have a lot of Blackened instrumentation with vocals on top. Track 2, that's pretty much the whole thing. But elsewhere, we usually go for more of a death metal or even kind of an aggressively sounding rock style. I think that primarily comes from the drums, though. There's a couple of rock beats in here that the guitars are definitely playing like some metal stuff, but the drums kind of lighten things up a little bit, and so they feel kind of like an aggressive rock style to me. But we always kind of take the intensity down a little bit whenever the vocals come in. And I find that to be an interesting pattern throughout that we continue to see even here on track 5. We have the black metal stuff coming in. I'm like, oh, geez, another track 2. Here we go. Lots of blast beats, lots of 16th note picking. Once the vocals come in, though, they chill out. That's interesting to me. If it wasn't for track 2, that would just be the norm for the album, which would raise questions. But I think having a song where you have these harsh vocals on top of the black metal style playing makes me question why we don't see more of it. Now, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm enjoying the fact that a lot of this album isn't blast beats and 16th note playing. And if the reason for that is because the vocalist doesn't like to sing on top of it, I'm fine with that. But it does make me question why. What part of the band decided that this was the way to go? Or is this just simple coincidence? well, I guess not really coincidence, but where musically the band just likes to take the pace down every now and then and focus on more deathier riffs with lighter drumming, and the vocalist just happens to find those easier to put his poetry over. I don't know. But I hear that pattern throughout here. I will say though, after this point, it's a pretty straightforward song. A couple of sections kind of got a chuckle out of me. There was this one part, I think it was the intro, going from the intro into the verse. Just two cymbal hits, crash cymbal hits within silence to just give us like beat 3, beat 4, and then everyone come back in. I found that a little comical. But otherwise, pretty straightforward song. You know, coming off of track 3 where I'm giggling at almost every transition because it's such an absurd change from where we were at. This is straightforward. Nothing in here really catches my attention too much. There's some fun drum parts, but nothing like we saw on tracks 1 or 3. The guitar riffs here, going for an eerie atmosphere. Sure, we have a little bit of a harmonic change, but as far as the riffage goes, it's kind of what I'm expecting from them so far. I got to hear the bass in a couple of places a little more. I like that. But as usual, the bass isn't really doing anything of interest. And more often than not, they're still sort of hidden behind everything anyways. It's just a straightforward track for me. If we were checking out this song in isolation, I probably have a lot to say about it, but pretty much everything I would say about it, I have mentioned on tracks 1 and 2. The only real big difference there is the atmosphere. And I'm kind of worried that that might be the analysis on the next 2 tracks as well. Odraza, with this album, certainly explores a few different styles. But I think that a lot of the more progressive tendencies with the expanded inspirations that I heard in track 1 that kind of gave me, kind of set the bar pretty high for me, has been undermined a little bit. Track 2, very straightforward black metal. Track 3 was impressive in a lot of ways and certainly not boring at all. That song was all over the place. But here we are on track 5, a pretty straightforward song. Dances between the black metal side and the death metal side a little bit, but doesn't really bring in anything that I would say changes the formula up or intrigues me in much. That's not to say it's bad. It's exceptionally well done music. It's kind of more of the same, which is how some albums go. Sometimes you're just really in the mood for one specific idea. Usually that's me, honestly. Bands who like to change up their style from song to song to song to song, I find really difficult to check out full albums because usually I'm in a mood for a very specific, type of music. And so I'll gravitate towards albums that have a very specific mood throughout. And honestly, we're only 4 tracks in. We're almost done with the album, but we're only 4 tracks in too. So that's always kind of interesting. Dang, even like the polyrhythmic stuff didn't really show up here much at all. There was some fun cymbal work going on in places, but none of the wild stuff we saw in tracks 1 and 3. This was just more of a muted track, kind of reining in some of their more esoteric ideas, their more progressive ideas, and creating something a bit more straightforward. I almost wonder if this would be equivalent to like a single. I know extreme metal doesn't get radio play pretty much anywhere. Well, as far as I know. But, if they were to make a single, this feels like it. It's the most straightforward song we've listened to so far, other than track 2, which I feel is just a bit too short and doesn't necessarily represent them. It is too focused, almost, and stands out quite a bit in the overall album as a song that has one identity and one idea and really drills it home. Even something like track 5 that we just listened to still had quite a bit of variety to it in the riffage, in the drum work, in the style of music. So, I'm going to take some time to read the lyrics on this one, and then we'll push into track 6. Alright, so a couple of things before we touch on the lyrics. Some part of me thought, wait a second, I think somebody hand translated these lyrics for me, which is a bit of a shame that I'm remembering now, where we've already checked out like 2 songs, I think, with Google translated lyrics. But nonetheless, I went and looked, and yeah, I also got a little bit of context on this, which is good because I couldn't find any elsewhere. None that was really of worth that would alter my appreciation for the music at all. But the person who requested the album mentioned that this album emerged as one of the first albums in a very distinct new wave of Polish black metal, next to one of Furia's albums, another title I'm not going to be able to pronounce, and the whole scene behind one of its more prominent members, Niall, that created and cooperated with others on countless projects. These bands created a new approach to black metal, one that is based in the urban world and the many problems that it brings, but takes a lot of musical ideas from punk and sludge. The themes frequently evoke images of decaying urban landscapes, alienation, and a sense of hopelessness. They explore the bleakness of modern existence and the internal struggles of individuals within this context. Yeah, 100%. I've landed on most of that musically and lyrically, but one thing that I don't think really stood out to me was issues of the urban world. The bleakness, the feeling of snow, of the compression of a very black and white style of music. This is just black metal. This is how I've described black metal for multiple years, ever since you all introduced it to me. But it never really dawned on me. I mean, I knew this, right? On the periphery, a lot of black metal is very pagan. It's very woodsy and nature-esque. We probably have listened to some black metal based around, modern day cities and modern day life. But as far as I can remember, it's not a prominent theme. And for this song or this album to talk about the ways that the people are allowing this place. Again, I don't know if it's a country or a city or a district or whatever, but the way that they're allowing this place to be, to exist, the repercussions of whatever economic issues are causing the bleak outlook for our narrator in several places of being homeless and jobless. This is all very modern in a way that I don't normally associate with black metal, but I never really picked up on either. As soon as I read that phrase, based in the urban world and the problems that it brings, I was like, oh, dude, yeah, and that's different. I don't know. I don't know why that didn't click with me. Maybe it's because a few of the albums we've done lately have sort of been societal critiques already, so it just feels like a normal part of doing album review recently for whatever reason. And it didn't trigger for me because of that. I don't know. But yeah, now that I read that, absolutely right. This is just not themes that I associate with it too much. Progressive rock, progressive metal, post-hardcore, punk, definitely. Black metal, though? Yeah, that's not somewhere I typically go for biting modern social criticism. Very cool. Very cool. All right. With all that said, though, this is time to dive into some lyrics. I did look at the hand-translated lyrics for the past couple of tracks that we've looked at, and it doesn't change my understanding or appreciation of them much at all. There are some sentences that I feel are a bit clearer, but one line, I meant to bring this up. One line that does stand out to me quite a bit was in The Great Misogynist. It was the very last line. It says, "And scream with all of your might." What I had got from Google was just streets. I don't understand that. But this translation says, scream with all your might, the streets. The streets, the streets. It's a repetition there. That's very different. Streets is just, that's just a noun, that's just a thing. But the streets is a very specific thing. It tends to represent the people, where they grow up. And particularly growing up on the bottom floor. We're talking about lower class people here, not people who live in penthouses or high rises. So I don't know how that line necessarily goes with anything else in that track, and the concept of the great misogynist isn't really explored in any way that I feel I understand that song any better. But that one line, I was like, okay, that makes a little more sense to me. I get it now. Track 3 though, Esperal Woven, or Woven of Esperal. Yep. It's pretty close to the Google Translate one. A couple of different words here and there. A couple of phrases I thought that were a little clearer to me. Better punctuation and stuff to imply specific phrasings and stuff like that. But it's still a song that mostly goes over my head, aside from the idea of being homeless and taking whatever you can get, including moldy bread. So I really appreciate the hand-translated lyrics. I wish I had remembered this earlier, but we still have it for the final couple of songs here, so we will go ahead and use them. Track 5 is called The Bitterness. This, I think, is a double entendre. It speaks about the bitterness of life, what drives people to, I don't know, partake in alcohol, maybe, to forget about their life for a moment and find something that's a little more joyous or happy, but also the bitterness of alcohol. It's actually really short. For an almost 7-minute song, there's not a lot of lines on this track. It says, between the autumn supper and the winter death. Very interesting phrasing there. I have no idea what that's supposed to represent. Again, maybe that's a Polish phrase. The idea between autumn and winter, they're back to back. So what comes between that? But between supper and death. Yeah, see, that one doesn't make any sense to me. I might be a little too American for that. It says, but between autumn supper and the winter death, the words of the Polish wander around. There were, and there will be no words, like a stone, no relentless hearts. As he was, so will the chokehold. I don't know what chokehold is. Maybe I should look that up real quick. Maybe that is... Yeah, let me check that out real quick. Alright, so... could be translated as a few different things which all seem to be loosely connected. We have the word mound, or maybe a hill or elevation, the peak or top of a hill, any rounded surface, maybe even short, thick hair. So the top of something rounded, some sort of mountain in general. So, there were and there will be no words, like a stone, no relentless hearts. As he was, so will the mountain. It's talking about being stoic, possibly. He says no relentless hearts, though, so that seems like people aren't pushing as hard as they should be. Maybe they're saying that he's as stationary as a mountain. Not necessarily the stoicness and unmovingness in a positive sense of, standing strong in your virtues, but just simply not doing anything, not moving, being lazy in a sense. It says, the content is a ruin for the form that I was supposed to be an executioner for you. Disorder and stagnation against the background of ruby time indications. Samagon of the sick years. And I'm a bit lost at some of this too. What is ruby time indications? What is a samagon? But after this, makes a lot of sense. He says, so booze, booze, and booze again. It'll break my mind and let it go out. We suppressed the sense. We went out into the night, spat at the laws of the world with contempt. Today, We pay homage to those in the graves, to the neck with every dirty breath. So booze, booze, booze again. Let it crumble their minds. So it's a bit of a celebration moment here, but also a little bit of trying to get our minds off of things. We pay homage to the people who have died to get us where we are today, but again, let the booze break our minds. Let us forget about things for a moment. Again, the bitterness of life and also the bitterness of the alcohol. However, the final statement says, dead, I'm alive, to rise up, to be reborn. Is he saying that after drinking, maybe the next day, he rises up reborn, maybe with a newfound sense of self, a new sense of drive and motivation? The next two lines make a lot of sense to me, though. How can you believe in tomorrow without today? I love that. I love that. If you really think things are going to be better tomorrow, you got to start today. Tomorrow doesn't exist until you get through today. So, yeah, I like that. Now, this song seems a bit on the both sides here. A little bit of a bleak outlook for the future, but also it's a bit of a party song. Hey, everyone, grab some alcohol. You know, we'll knock some back, put some cheers out for those who came before us, and we'll be better tomorrow. Musically, I don't really get any of that, though. So, another one of those situations where I don't see how the music and lyrics line up. And I think that kind of makes me lean towards the idea that the first track was more of a fortunate happenstance, that I could find so much thematic ties between the two. It doesn't seem to be a high priority for them on the rest of the album, though. Alrighty. Track 6. Let's dive into this one and see what we do in the penultimate song of the album. Bringing more of that punk energy back in the vocals. Classic post-hardcore idea. The guitars kind of peter out, the drumming gets a little awkward, it feels like the song falls apart, and the vocalist coughs. That is such a post-hardcore move. An interesting shift towards a more atmospheric style of playing. We've heard this at times in other tracks, particularly track 3. Ooh, I like that ride cymbal roll. Okay. I'm sorry, what? We heard that riff in another track. Was it track 3? Dude, that cymbal work though is very tight. Come on, really? This is solid. Such a warm sound to bring an acoustic guitar in this late to the game. Blast beats and the reggaeton rhythm. It's a cross stick. What is going on here? Metal, right? Oh no. This band, who do they think they are? Okay. no chance that track 7's gonna top that. That's my favorite song on the album. Hands down. Legitimately beautiful writing, cool ideas, great atmosphere. I will say the drumming at the end, it's a little absurd at times, but it's one of those things where it sort of ends up being like it loops back in on itself, where it's so wildly disjointed that somehow it goes back to being perfectly fit for the situation. I don't know, like I don't understand it. It's like integer overflow in programming. When like the value gets so high and what was this? It was a thing in like older programming languages. Like after it would get to 255, instead of going to 256, it loops back to zero. Basically overflow back to emptying out. That's what this is like. It's so absurd that it somehow flips into exactly what the song needs at the moment. I don't get it. Uh yeah, favorite song though, easily. Track 7's gonna have to do some crazy stuff. Crazy cohesive stuff. Not like track 3. Cohesive stuff in order to take that out of that slot. That's just. So here's the thing, right? I wrote down over here the only note I needed because everything else just it's so good it just stuck with me. Straightforward music until post-hardcore cough. That's not a sentence I expected to write today. So there are so many post-hardcore bands and kind of adjacent to, once you kind of get into some emo areas also, that are kind of pushing away from like mall emo into like true emo. Screamo likes to do this too. The song just kind of breaks whatever the guitarist was doing. They start bending, or maybe they use the whammy bar, and they just use this gradual movement with continuous strumming to make it sound like the pitch is just continuing to rise or fall, whichever way they want to do it. The drum pattern just kind of falls apart. I don't know if you've ever been part of a rehearsal for a rock band, metal band, post-hardcore band, whatever. And somebody just messes up real bad, and there's just no way to recover, and everybody just kind of flubs about, just kind of wraps up their riff or their drum pattern on their own, and everyone kind of loses time with each other. That's what it sounds like. The song literally falls apart, and the vocalist, away from the microphone, you get these distant sounds of coughing. I don't know who started this trend, but it's in way too many bands for it not to be noticed as a pattern within the post-hardcore genre. And that's exactly what we got here. The drum pattern just kind of falls apart. There's no more tempo. There's no backbeat. The guitar begins to raise their pitch while still strumming in a consistent pattern. And so you have this sound of like this rising pitch going on, and the bassist is just kind of boom, 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 just kind of like dropping down in pitch in whatever riff he wants to play. And the vocal is just coughing in the background. Now, the small difference here is that we do have a second vocal screaming, yelling, whatever, and delivering what sounds to be the lyrics in time with the original tempo. That was an interesting little twist, but everything else is straight up pulled from like the post-hardcore blueprint book. I don't think I've ever heard that outside of post-hardcore, really, or screamo, emo, anything in that sort of pocket. Definitely nothing I've ever heard in metal. Is wild. But what I think is even wilder is that this doesn't just exist within the song, but it exists as like a Rubicon. Because once you go past this point in the track, nothing is the same. You can't return back to that very traditional style at the beginning. Or I guess that is to say, Odraza never returns back to that more traditional metal style at the beginning, the more straightforward playing. From here, we kick in a very chord heavy atmospheric style of playing. I would even say that the chords are very different from the aggressive chord progressions and even the drearier chord progressions we've seen elsewhere. This paints the picture of something exceptionally bleak and melancholic, a word I haven't really used much for this album. While it does line up with bleakness rather well, it is a different feeling entirely. Bleakness is hopelessness. It's a lack of optimism for the future. Melancholy is sadness. They typically go hand in hand. If you don't have hope for the future, you're typically not going to be a pretty happy fellow. So, but it's not something I would say is a core element of the album, at least not up until this point, where we begin to introduce melancholic aspects. I love this whole section, the bass having a bit more prominence in the mix, the guitars not being quite as muddied anymore. There's a bit more clarity to them, kind of bringing the energy down, which is really nice because we've been running at full speed for quite some time now. And it sets up, it caught me off guard. We got the PHC thing, the post-hardcore cough. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Don't know what's going on here. So my guard is kind of down because I'm like, oh, this is kind of familiar in unfamiliar territory. Not to say that I don't understand black metal. Unfortunately, I understand it very well. But it's not, it's not where I feel most comfortable at with music. And this is like, oh, okay, I have a point of reference for this. And then the atmosphere comes in. I'm like, oh, this is gorgeous. My guard is totally let down at this point. I'm here for the ride. I'm thinking, okay, Odraza, where are we taking this? Things get weird. Back to some wildly esoteric guitar work. Really have no idea what's going on with that. We haven't seen that since track 3. Here we are, track 6, bringing back some really wild harmonic ideas, rhythmic ideas in the guitar. We bring in a little bit more of the metal side of things before lightening things up again and focusing on this very chill final, 3 minutes of the song, give or take, 2.5. Gorgeous idea. I love the melodies, I love the harmonies, I love the bass work actually playing alongside and embellishing on what the guitars are doing rather than just playing exactly what the guitars are doing an octave down. Even the drums here start out rather chill and tame. It's a very laid back feeling, but it's a laid back sound paired with this melancholy. It's not laid back and chill. It's laid back and bored and depressed and melancholic. It isn't a lack of movement because you're relaxed. It's a lack of movement because you have no willpower. Phenomenal moment right here. Now, this reading of this section gets completely decimated as the drummer once again decides to do whatever he feels like and put some wild ideas in this really laid back section. This was the same as track 3, wasn't it? I didn't put a note down for this, but I think it was track 3 that did this too. I have no idea what's going on. And once again, I think the drum ideas here are phenomenal. I love the polyrhythms. I love the ever-shifting concepts, the ever-shifting patterns. I love the melodic drumming going on here. There's a lot of things to praise. I just don't really think that it fits. This song, or this section of the song, is supposed to feel nihilistic. It's supposed to feel completely overwhelming. I think the slow tempo really works for that. It sells the dreariness, it sells the melancholy, it sells the depression. And then the drummer ramps it up and makes it an energetic moment. It's all over the place, it's chaotic, there's blast beats, there's a reggaeton beat. It's constantly changing, constantly moving. It makes me want to giggle at times. It makes me want to groove to it. It makes me want to bob my head with the infectious rhythms it's laying down. That seems to be counterintuitive to the atmosphere the guitars and bass are crafting. It seems to be counterintuitive with the original drum pattern for this section. I don't get it, but I think outside of a thematic framing, it works somehow. As I mentioned earlier, it's such an absurd combination that somehow it circles back upon itself and just becomes exactly what the moment needed. I think by the end of the song, I really enjoyed this energetic, moving, melodic drum work alongside this moody guitar work. I just can't tie that thematically to anything else. It's lost its own thread at that point. Maybe it's supposed to represent an overbearing amount of noise or something like that, but I don't find it to be noisy. If they went pure blast beats on top of the atmospheric guitar, I could go with that interpretation. But here it's infectious, it's groovy, it's interesting. It perks my ears up, which all of these descriptions seem to be the opposite of intense boredom, melancholy, and depression. Now, maybe I just have the totally wrong read on the harmonic elements of the guitars, and maybe this section is supposed to be speaking a different emotional resonance. Maybe within that context, the drum work fits thematically, but I don't have another read on this. I don't have another perspective. I've tried to sort of like work around it, see it from a different, and I can't. This section just feels like total defeat, and the energy of the drums don't match that. Even though I do like the idea in isolation outside of a thematic framework, I think it's a very cool concept, and that introduces an interesting question too. As an artist, how far do you take your art in an artistic direction, and how far do you take it in a sonically pleasant one? Where do you make that division? Where do you make the compromise? It's a tough one. You make it too artsy, people won't get it. You make it too rule of cool, this sounds good kind of stuff, and you're going to lose the thematic thread. You got to meet somewhere in the middle, usually, unless you want to be an art house type of artist, in which case you can go full on art house. Or if you want to be an entertainer, you can go full on rule of cool stuff, and only your words are where the themes lie. There's certainly bands who have done both sides of those to the extremes rather well and have accrued, a following. As usual, I'm more of a middle of the grounds kind of guy. And here, like I said, I kind of feel like the theme gets lost amongst just creating a cool, progressive moment. It's a bit esoteric at times, but ultimately enjoyable. But yeah, this song it kept me on my toes in a positive way. Track 3 kept me on my toes in a way that made me question why they were making this music. But this track kept me on my toes in a way that I enjoyed it. I think that the twists and turns were really fun. I think that the odd combinations of sounds were fun. And despite being a heavy, bleak, dreary song for most of it, fun is still kind of the way I would call it. Some really wild ideas and great melody writing, great atmospheric writing, great drumming. That ending, though. Let's hit some lyrics. I'm a little lost with these lyrics as well. It says she once came into a blizzard at night. The crunch of snow under her shoes sounded like music. He has been stranded by fear. She is as old as winter. For 7 years in this swamp, and the end is not seen. Two shadows dance by candlelight. confession in the chamber, and black as the power of a confessor. This is it, the grave, the chamber, and nobody there. That's him, a corpse, a cigarette and coffee, and she's abhorrence. The abhorrence comes for more. It demands more and more. And that's it. That's the whole song. I forgot how short the lyrical elements were, and that's so much of the song. Like the last 5 minutes of it is that wild instrumental stuff. But I don't quite understand this. We have a him and a her. Their shadows dance by candlelight, so they're in a place that is described as a chamber or a grave. They're alone here by candle. She came through a blizzard to get here. She's also old as winter. He is consumed by fear. It calls this a grave or a chamber, but says that nobody's here, and it calls him a corpse, a cigarette and coffee. That's another one of those metaphors that I think is a cultural thing. Completely goes over my head. It says, and she, it trails off. Abhorrence. Abhorrence is an extreme hatred or loathing for someone or something, and it says the abhorrence comes for more and it demands more and more. So the hatred is all consuming. I don't know. It feels almost like a fairy tale where some of the elements are a bit heightened. There's definitely some stuff in here that is a bit on the vaguer side. I think if I understood more of the cultural relationships to some of these ideas, maybe it would make more sense, but I'm too much of an outsider to understand, I think, what some of these figurative phrases are meant to imply about the characters. So yeah, I'm a bit lost on that one, too. My only read on it would be that this her who comes through the blizzard and is older than winter, maybe even older than time itself, since winter's been around for quite some time. She arrives at this person's house. Maybe she's the embodiment of death. It calls this chamber. The song is translated to the doorstep. And it calls this area where this man has been stranded by fear. Calls it a grave. And that nobody is there. That's the only read I have on it, honestly, and I feel like I'm grasping at straws there because I have a tough time bringing in the abhorrence ending into that. And I don't know how that ties into any of the societal elements that the rest of the album has fixated on. So we're just gonna have to move on from here. Check out this final epic track, because I don't have a strong read on that one lyrically. Let's see how they wrap this up with an 11.5-minute, probably wildly progressive track. More of this clean electric stuff. I really love doing this. We had the acoustic on the last track, but that was really about it. Those slides are a nice touch. A little cheesy, but a nice touch. Okay, the bass is angry. It's like, put me in the production or else. Yeah, it's nice. So the title translates to there, where we won't meet us. Interesting title. Yeah, nice pacing. The rising and falling energy to give way to this moody section with the bass. Bass riding shotgun with the bass kick. I like that working together there. And there's enough room on the low end for both to exist. Yeah. Oh, what is? The guitar stuff's nice. That bass kick rhythm is a little wonky. It plays against the beat for so long. Okay. Very Tool in this section. Not a comparison I thought I'd make today. Okay, yeah, dude, this tom fill is a fun idea to put on top of the bass kicks. I want to hear more black metal that's tom focused like that. Also, spoken word? Interesting way to wrap the album up. Fun ride cymbal idea. Oh, even more. really eerie. Shift to 3 as well. Dude, it's moments like this. I just want this band to make acoustic or clean electric atmospheric music. It's a lot of buzz on that string. Oh, the slide. I'm waiting for the drummer to start throw some wild polyrhythms in here. This is gorgeous though. I like how there's little pockets of hope, but they always resolve into something rather tense. Which is like the opposite of resolution, but just how the chord progression ends. Ooh. So they're gonna do another minute-long fade out. I mean, I guess that makes sense over the course of the song or the album, though. A bleak outlook on the future means that this sort of heaviness, the melancholic components of this narrative aren't going to be over anytime soon. They're going to be cyclical, continuing to exist. So the fade out on the album makes sense. We could have faded out one section earlier though, couldn't we have? Yeah, I think so. Anyways. Well, that's definitely not taking track 6 from my favorite, but it had a chance there. Some cool parts at the beginning, some cool parts in the middle, a wonderful penultimate section. There's a lot of stuff in there that I enjoyed. but a bit of a sour taste left in my mouth to wrap it up, and a lot of straightforward black metal stuff that we didn't really see too much of on track 6, which immediately makes that one better, in my opinion. However, I think this does a great job at wrapping everything up musically. We're continuing to check out this eerier, melancholic side of the album that we started checking out in track 4 and 5, pretty much the back half of this album, focusing on those sounds. We're kind of running with it, trying to pair it back into the metallic aspect of the rest of this album. You know, we've had a lot of metal leading up to this back half, and we're starting to explore a more atmospheric side with the final couple of tracks. And this song tries to bring that all together to a head to reach this climax for the entirety of the album. And I think it does that well. I do think that if you enjoy black metal, if you find blast beats to be exhilarating and a massive peak, even within the peaks that it's already created, the ending is probably going to be a really fantastic finale, not just to the song, but to the album as a whole. I don't sit on that though. That is not my perspective on it. I'm a big fan of contrast. I like harsh vocals. I like blast beats as spice. When you play them against more typical styles of performance, they can be explosive, cathartic, emotional experiences. But when pretty much the entire album is harsh vocals, the entire album is blast beats and heavy extreme metal, they no longer become peaks, they become the status quo. And so when we leave that atmosphere, which is a massive peak for me, because we haven't really felt anything like that on the entirety of the song, it's been something that we've dabbled with, but I felt was really growing into something interesting, especially when the guitars backed out and we had the bass and the guitar starting to set up this funky rhythm. I really wanted to know where that was going. And with only like 2 minutes left in the song, I really figured this was the wrap up of the album. We don't really have time to accelerate things to ramp up the intensity again. And as this idea was beginning to build into something out of nowhere, we get blast beats and 16th note playing. Now, within this pocket of the light atmosphere into the blast beats, this is great contrast. I'm not a huge fan of the harsh transition, but focusing just on contrast, it's fine. But when so much of this song was already focusing on that style of music, when so much of the album is already focusing on that side of the music, this lonely, somber atmosphere is the contrast. Going back to the blast beats is not a peak for me. It's a return to status quo. It actually brings my excitement down. We are returning back to the norm, getting away from the extreme, which kind of feels backwards when a couple of clean electric guitars are the extremity and the blast beats are the norm. Usually that's the opposite, but in this case, it's entirely true. I thought it was a very bleak, somber outlook at the end of this album, and instead I got slammed in the face with blast beats that the only way I can interpret is a crushing weight. The bleakness and the lack of hope for the future being represented in physical form. A I don't know, a 2-ton idea crushing the listener. Feeling the same weight and bleakness that the narrator does through sonic representation. And I really think that is the most positive read I can have on that, because otherwise I think they absolutely ruined a phenomenal ending to put a little bit of metal in at the end of the album. And this is definitely a hashtag ruined by metal moment for me, which again is super subjective. Every time I say that, I really expect getting flamed in the comments. But it absolutely is. I was really enjoying what they were doing, not just in isolation, but thematically resonant with the themes of the album. I thought that was a perfect way to wrap the entire experience up. And they subvert it to throw in stuff that I'm not generally a big fan of to begin with, but that I have definitely heard more than my fair share of today. That's kind of where I sit with that. Oh, yeah, Salt in the Wound, though. That somber moment also is the first time we brought the energy down, worked with some clean electrics, and the drummer didn't decide to try to steal the spotlight with some wild, eclectic, avant-garde drumming. So I was really liking that part. Uh, Dang, man. I gotta go back. I want to see my body language when that final metal section came in. I bet that was hilarious because I could feel the disappointment on the inside, and I know I wear my emotions on my sleeve. I'm sure that was probably. I can't wait to go back and see that. Oh man. If nothing else, I hope you all got a good laugh out of that. Assuming I did anything. Generally speaking, though, I do enjoy this song. There's definitely more black metal stuff on this track than others, but it definitely airs towards a more experimental side of writing, and I personally loved a lot of the drum work going on in here. The guitars kind of shifted towards more of a black metal style, quick picking with a melodic flair, trying to achieve both melody and atmosphere simultaneously out of the guitars. I think this is something that black metal tends to do okay with. When I think of like death metal, and I think usually you have a lead guitar with the melody, the lead lick or riff, and then you have a rhythm guitar who plays the chords and maybe has a different texture and guitar tone so that they can address the atmosphere. Black metal kind of crams all of that into one guitar. They're super fuzzy, super distorted, super muddy even at times. It's where the mid-fi production really helps with the atmosphere and the constant playing. Usually, even if you can get rid of the picking sound and kind of getting that shoegazy element of where you just hear the notes themselves, you get a really strong atmosphere out of that, but then you can also play melody while having all of this texture, and both guitars can provide harmony to each other, and really you have two guitars doing the job of three or four. It's one of the places where black metal really excels, and I think that some of the writing in here works really well in that direction too. I think elsewhere on this track, we either had the death metal melodic riffage or we had the black metal style 16th note picking, usually on more of a harmonic textural element. But here we actually see all of it come together. Harmony, texture, and melody and atmosphere, all just from the two guitars. I think it's where their black metal writing is most traditional, is in this track. And these moments I think generally work fine. Not my cup of tea, not the sound I usually go out looking for, but I think they pull it off really well. And this entire track oozes with atmosphere and personality in a way that the others kind of don't. I think a lot of that just comes down to the more death metal oriented guitar riffage in most of the other tracks. But yeah, this one just comes off as very atmospheric to me. Even at times, I think moving towards atmospheric black metal in a way that most of the other songs haven't. So I like even here at the end of this album, they're still finding ways to surprise me with inspirations and composition. The drumming, though, during many of these sections where the guitars are doing atmosphere and melody is consistently wild. I found this to be a highlight. Basically, every 4-bar phrase on the drums is different. They'll start out with, something light on the toms, and then they'll go heavy on the toms, and then they'll bring in a pretty straightforward, quarter note on every beat on the cymbals, and then they'll spice that up a little bit with some syncopation, and then they'll move into like a triplet while also like moving the bass kick from 16th notes to triplet 8th notes or something like that. And there's just like every 4 bars the drummer is doing something wildly different, and the final bar is a wild drum fill. The guitars, they're doing their thing. They're locked in. Not a lot of change going on there. The vocals, they're doing their spoken word stuff. Not a lot of change going on there. The drummer, though, flipping the script every couple of seconds. It's really impressive. And it's one of the things that I've loved about the drummer this entire album is just being able to listen to them change things up. Alter the flow, alter the time feel, alter everything. They don't like standing still at all, and it's been a detriment personally in a couple of sections where I would have liked a little bit more stability in the atmosphere. But ultimately, it's always a pleasure to see where the drummer's going, what they're going to do next, what kind of crazy metric mod or polyrhythm they're going to introduce. And this track is no different. In fact, I think the drummer here really shows off their chops and leans into it heavier than anywhere else. In fact, the entire outro of this song, including the fade out, has a consistently changing drum pattern to it. So I just had a lot of opportunity here to kind of show off their drumming chops, show off all of their different rhythmic complexities and ideas, and just really put on display the width of their rhythmic writing and even melodic writing in some places. That's the highlight to me on this track, because other than that, we have a lot of black metal playing, a lot of repetition going on there with the guitars, and then the atmospheric mid to end point, which was honestly a lot of chords. So one of the places I think where the guitars showed off the least amount, but it all was all in service for the atmosphere of the song. We got to hear the bass a couple of times on this track too, which was awesome. Just like, there's a lot of cool parts to this track. Honestly, my only hang up is the ending. I wish they had just ended on the somber, clean electric part. The spoken word was interesting though. Wasn't expecting clean vocals at all on this, but definitely wasn't expecting spoken word. That's an interesting choice. With that said, let's dive into some lyrics, see what was being said on that track. Okay, so this actually puts the ending black metal part into perspective. I still don't think I like it. I would rather have ended this a little differently, but I can see how it thematically works with the lyrics of this track. This song is about finding the willpower to make tomorrow better, regardless of the bleakness of today. It says, there where we won't meet us. That is said every other line. The idea, I think, is there being someplace in the future, sometime in the future, where we won't meet us. The us today won't be able to meet the whole of humanity tomorrow. That there will be some of us who are not going to make it through this, but that it's necessary to go through this hardship in order to make a better future. It says it won't come from ashes today, but from will we will get tomorrow. So the losses of today aren't going to build us up, but the willpower of today will help us craft a better tomorrow. It says the night does not end with a night, but the day starts with a day. That one goes a little over my head. It says melancholy shall not devour us. Very straightforward. So we will not succumb to the bleakness of our lives. And it says from the paving rose a desire and tore the city. So very straightforward. From the very bottom floor, again, talking about the street, talking about the lowest class of people, there will be a desire. We will tear this city down and start anew. Very powerful, optimistic stuff for an album that doesn't have a lot of optimism in it. And I think that's what the drive is at the end of this album. It is the momentum necessary to build up and be better tomorrow. All right, so those are my thoughts on this album from Odraza. I still can't I still can't pronounce the name of it. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Did you enjoy this album? Is there anything that I said that you would like to add on to, or maybe correct me if I was wrong about anything? Please put all of that, as well as any interpretations or extra thoughts that you have on this album, down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC. We'll be doing a live stream. It goes for about 2.5 hours. We check out some songs. We have some good conversation. It's a great time to get to know more of the community. Just kind of relax, listen to some good music, and have some good conversation. Otherwise, I'll be back Monday as usual at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, with next week's theme. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.